I never thought I'd be the guy sitting alone in my car, hands shaking, trying to make sense of the messages I just saw on my wife's phone. But here I am, parked a block away from our house, staring at the screen, reading the same damn texts over and over again, hoping somehow they'll change. They don't. It started as one of those gut feelings you try to ignore. The late nights out, the sudden interest in going to the gym, a new set of lingerie that I hadn't seen in months, if ever. But I brushed it off. Hell, maybe I didn't want to face it. Because who wants to believe that the woman you've been with for over a decade, the mother of your kids, would do something like this? But the signs became harder to ignore. Her phone, always glued to her hand. The quick, subtle smiles whenever a notification popped up, followed by her flipping the screen over, like she didn't want me to see it. I should have asked her right then. I should have called her out. Instead, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just work stress. Until today. Today, she made the mistake of leaving her phone on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs getting ready. A text came through, and I glanced at it, more out of habit than suspicion. I can't wait to see you later. Last night was incredible. Miss your lips already. My stomach dropped. That's when I grabbed the phone, stepped outside, and sat in my car. My fingers scrolled through their messages, each one hitting harder than the last. She's been sleeping with him for months. It wasn't a fling. This was a full-blown affair. All the while, I was at home, being the good husband, putting the kids to bed, planning weekends for us to reconnect, thinking our marriage was just going through a rough patch. Nope. She was screwing some guy behind my back, and I had been too blind to see it. Now, the real question was, what the hell was I going to do about it? My hands were still shaking when I drove back to the house. I couldn't sit there any longer, staring at that phone, rereading the filth between Rachel and this prick. I needed to confront her. The words were stuck in my throat, but I knew there was no way around it. I wasn't going to play dumb anymore. When I walked back inside, the house was quiet. Our kids were at school, and she was upstairs in the bedroom, probably picking out some outfit for work. I knew she wasn't heading to the office today, she had a different kind of meeting lined up. It took every ounce of self-control not to explode right there. I headed upstairs, heart pounding, trying to keep it together. She was sitting on the bed, looking at herself in the mirror, running her fingers through her hair like nothing was wrong. I could feel the anger boiling inside me, but I didn't want to start screaming. I needed answers first. Hey, I said, my voice steady, though I didn't feel steady at all. We need to talk. She glanced at me through the mirror, raising an eyebrow. What's up? I tossed the phone onto the bed in front of her. Her eyes flickered from the screen to me, and in that instant, I saw the color drain from her face. She didn't even try to hide it. She knew what I'd seen. Explain, I said, arms crossed, trying not to completely lose it. She didn't pick up the phone. Didn't even try to pretend. Instead, she just stared at it, like maybe if she stayed quiet long enough, it would all go away. But it didn't. Who the hell is he, Rachel? I demanded, my voice getting louder. Her eyes finally met mine, but there wasn't any remorse there, just fear. She knew she was caught. It's not what you think, she mumbled. Not what I think. I barked out a bitter laugh. You think I'm an idiot? I read the texts. I know everything. She stood up, running her hands through her hair again, this time out of nervousness. Daniel, it's not like that. It's complicated. Complicated? I repeated. You've been screwing this guy behind my back for months. How is that complicated? She tried to step closer, reaching out for my arm, but I jerked away. Please, she said, her voice shaky. I didn't mean for this to happen. I was lonely. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lonely? I snapped. I'm here every day. I'm with the kids, I work, I make sure everything in this damn house runs smoothly, and you're lonely? It's not that simple, she shot back, her own anger starting to surface now. You've been so distant, so checked out. I didn't plan for this. It just happened. I felt my blood boiling. You didn't plan for it? So what, one day you just tripped and landed in his bed? She turned away from me, her voice lowering. You don't understand what it's like. You're always working or with the kids. We haven't had time for each other in months. I needed someone. I stared at her, disbelief flooding my mind. The excuses, the blame, it was like she had prepared for this conversation. But I wasn't buying any of it. I was ready to snap. What's his name? I demanded. I want to know who this guy is. She stayed quiet. That silence told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't going to say a word. She was going to protect him. Without thinking, I grabbed her phone again and started scrolling, looking for anything that could lead me to him. An address, a name, something. She lunged for the phone, trying to snatch it out of my hand, but I shoved her away. Daniel, stop, she yelled, her voice cracking. This isn't going to help anything. But I didn't stop. I wasn't going to stop until I found him. And then, there it was, an address. Not far from here. Close enough for me to drive to in 10 minutes. The bastard lived in our town. I felt something snap inside me. I couldn't just sit here and let this continue. I wasn't going to let him get away with screwing my wife and pretending like nothing happened. Before I knew it, I was grabbing my car keys and heading for the door. Where are you going? Rachel called after me, panic in her voice. I didn't answer. I didn't even look back at her. I just slammed the door behind me, got in my car, and drove. The whole ride, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing. What was I going to do? I didn't know exactly, but I knew one thing: I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he couldn't hide behind his phone anymore. When I pulled up to the address, I sat there for a minute, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking again, but this time from rage, not fear. I didn't even think about knocking. I just stormed up to the front door and started banging on it like a madman. After a few moments, the door opened, and there he was. I recognized him immediately from the pictures I saw on Rachel's phone. Tall, smug, mid-30s, probably thought he was God's gift to women. His face twisted in confusion as he looked at me. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just swung. My fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling back into his own hallway. I followed him inside, slamming the door behind me. You think you can just screw another man's wife and get away with it? I shouted, grabbing him by the shirt and shoving him against the wall. He was still dazed from the punch, but he tried to defend himself, pushing back against me. I don't know what you're talking about. Bullshit. I roared, slamming him into the wall again. I know everything. You've been sleeping with Rachel for months, you piece of shit. The look on his face shifted from confusion to fear, and I could tell he knew exactly who I was now. Listen, man, he stammered, trying to catch his breath. I didn't know she was married, I swear. I didn't believe him for a second. I punched him again, this time harder, watching him crumple to the ground. You knew exactly what you were doing, I spat, standing over him. By this point, he was scrambling to his feet, trying to get away, but I wasn't letting him off that easy. I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the nearest piece of furniture, sending a table crashing to the ground. Please, man, he begged, holding up his hands defensively. Just let me explain. I didn't care about his explanations. I was seeing red, my mind consumed with nothing but anger and betrayal. He tried to make a run for the door, but I tackled him to the ground, pinning him beneath me. I raised my fist again, ready to swing, when suddenly, I heard the sound of a siren in the distance. The police. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I looked down at him. He was bleeding from his nose, his eyes wide with fear. You don't know what you've done, I muttered, my voice shaking with rage. But I didn't hit him again. The sound of the siren grew louder, and I knew the cops were almost here. I didn't want to end up in jail because of this asshole. I stood up, backing away from him, still breathing heavily. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting toward the door like he was going to make a break for it. But he didn't. He just stood there, wiping the blood from his face, glaring at me. The next few minutes were a blur. The police arrived, banging on the door. I raised my hands, backing away slowly, trying to show them I wasn't resisting. They stormed in, guns drawn, shouting for me to get on the ground. I complied, dropping to my knees, my heart still racing. One of the officers cuffed me while another went to check on the bastard, who was still cowering in the corner. I didn't resist. What was the point? As they led me out to the squad car, I glanced back at him one last time. He was standing there, blood dripping down his face, staring at me with a look that I'd never forget. He thought he'd won. He thought this was the end of it. But he was wrong. I didn't say a word as the cops cuffed me and shoved me into the back of the squad car. My mind was still reeling from what I'd just done. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smug bastard's face, the blood on his lips, his weak attempts to explain. That image stuck with me as the car pulled away, the lights flashing through the windows, and I tried to process what the hell I was going to do next. They took me to the station, booked me, and threw me in a holding cell. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, and my face was burning hot with anger that hadn't cooled down. As I sat there, staring at the grimy walls, reality started to sink in. This wasn't over by a long shot. The fight was just beginning. Rachel. I couldn't stop thinking about her. My wife, the woman I had trusted for over a decade, was the one who put me in this position. She was the reason I'd just spent the last hour getting my ass hauled into a jail cell. Her betrayal, her lies, her selfishness had led to this. The thought of going home to her made me want to scream, but that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. Hours passed before they let me out. The charges weren't too heavy, just an assault charge, and since I had no prior record, I was out on bail in no time. I guess even the cops saw it for what it was, some guy snapping after finding out his wife was screwing around. One of them even gave me a look that seemed to say, I get it. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what I was going to do next. As soon as I stepped outside the station, I saw her car. Rachel was waiting for me. She had the nerve to sit there, acting like the worried wife, her face pale, eyes red from crying. I felt the anger flare up again, but I kept it under control. I had to. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose it again. She jumped out of the car as soon as she saw me. Daniel, she cried, rushing over to me. Oh my God, are you okay? I'm so sorry, I didn't know what to do, I had to call the police. You were going to kill him. I stared at her, not saying a word. Her face was puffy, her eyes swollen with tears. She was playing the victim, just like I knew she would. Get in the car, I said flatly, pushing past her and heading for the passenger seat. I wasn't going to have this conversation here. Not outside the police station, not where anyone could see us. I needed to get home, calm down, and then I would deal with her. She didn't argue. She followed me to the car, got in, and started driving. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. I could feel her glancing at me from time to time, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Good. Let her stew in it for a while. Let her feel the weight of what she'd done. We pulled into the driveway, and as soon as the car stopped, I got out and headed inside. I didn't wait for her. The moment I stepped into the house, I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. This was our home. The place where we built our lives together, raised our kids. And all the while, she had been sneaking around, turning everything we had into a joke. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down at the table. Rachel followed me in, standing awkwardly by the doorway, wringing her hands. I could tell she was nervous, unsure of what I was going to say or do. Good. She should be scared. You want to explain yourself now? I said, my voice cold and calm, the exact opposite of what I was feeling. She swallowed hard, stepping closer but still keeping her distance. Daniel, please, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. Cut the crap, I snapped, slamming my hand down on the table. I don't want your excuses. I want to know how long this has been going on. Her eyes filled with tears again, and she wiped at them quickly. It's been a few months, she whispered. But it wasn't serious, I swear. I never loved him. It was just, I don't know, a distraction. A distraction? I repeated, my voice rising. A distraction from what? From me? From your family? She shook her head, the tears now streaming down her face. I don't know, Daniel. I don't know why I did it. I was lonely. You've been so busy with work, and the kids, and everything. I felt like we were drifting apart. The rage in me flared up again. So instead of talking to me, instead of telling me how you were feeling, you decided to spread your legs for some guy? That's how you fix things? Her face twisted in pain, and she looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't want it to be like this, she murmured. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I love you, Daniel. I do. I don't want to lose you. I sat there, staring at her, feeling nothing but contempt. The woman standing in front of me was not the woman I had married. This was someone else, someone selfish, someone who had thrown away everything we had built together for what? A few cheap thrills? You love me? I repeated, my voice cold. You sure have a funny way of showing it. She flinched, taking a step back. Please, Daniel. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. We can go to counseling, we can work through this. Just, don't leave me. The desperation in her voice made my skin crawl. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. That was all this was. Damage control. She didn't want to lose the life we had built, the comfort, the security, the image of the perfect family. But that life was already gone. I'm not going to leave you, I said, standing up and walking toward her. For a moment, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. She thought she had gotten to me. She thought her tears and her begging had worked. But I wasn't done. No, I continued, my voice hard. I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to stay right here, in this house, with our kids. But things are going to change, Rachel. You want to play games with me? Fine. We'll play. Her face paled, and I could see the panic starting to set in. What do you mean? I said, stepping closer to her, you don't get to walk away from this clean. You think you can just say sorry and we'll move on? No. You're going to pay for what you did. I'm going to make sure you feel every ounce of the pain you caused me. She took a step back, fear flashing in her eyes. Daniel, please. I'm not done, I interrupted, my voice low and cold. You're going to tell the kids what you did. You're going to look them in the eyes and tell them you destroyed this family. And after that, you're going to sit here and watch as I start taking apart everything we built together. Piece by piece. Her hand flew to her mouth, and she shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, please. Don't do this to them. You did this to them, I shot back. Not me. You're the one who tore this family apart. Now you get to live with it. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. But I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. She had made her choice. Now she had to live with the consequences. I left her there, broken and crying, and walked upstairs to our bedroom. The same bedroom where she had snuck off to send her lover texts, the same bedroom where she had lied to me over and over again. I felt sick just being in there, but I wasn't going to let her have this space anymore. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started packing up my things. Not to leave, oh no. I wasn't going anywhere. But I was moving out of this bedroom. I couldn't stand the sight of her in our bed, couldn't stomach the idea of sharing a space with her anymore. Once I had my things packed, I moved them into the guest room down the hall. From now on, that was my room. I would sleep there, away from her, until I figured out my next steps. Divorce was inevitable, but I wasn't in any rush. Not yet. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done first. As I settled into the guest room, I heard her crying from downstairs. It filled the house, a constant reminder of the mess she had made. But I didn't feel sorry for her. This was just the beginning of her payback. And I wasn't done yet. I lay awake that night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts were a storm, swirling between everything Rachel had said and what I had seen on her phone. Her sobs had finally stopped, but I couldn't sleep. The anger was still there, simmering under my skin, fueling me. It wasn't just about her anymore. She had already felt some of what was coming to her, but there was someone else in this mess. Someone who hadn't faced the consequences yet. The guy. Him. I couldn't stop thinking about his face when I walked into his house. He had that cocky look for a second, like he didn't realize what was coming. Then fear, pure fear. And that pathetic excuse, claiming he didn't know Rachel was married. He knew. He had to have known. The texts were full of references to me, to our kids, to our life. He wasn't some innocent bystander. He was a willing participant in tearing apart my family. He deserved everything that was coming to him. The thought of what I'd already done, beating him to the ground and leaving him bleeding, didn't feel like enough. It was a start, sure, but not enough. Not for a man who had slept with my wife for months, who had seen my family and thought it was fine to step in and ruin it. I needed to go further. I needed him to feel the same level of destruction he had caused. I got out of bed and sat at the small desk in the guest room, flipping open my laptop. I knew his name now. Knew where he worked. I started typing. In just a few clicks, I was staring at his profile on social media. Public, of course. He wasn't smart enough to keep anything locked down. I scrolled through his posts, pictures of him out at bars, hanging with friends, smiling like he had no care in the world. And that's when I saw something interesting. He worked for a local real estate company. Perfect. I spent the next hour digging into his life online. His job, his friends, his clients. Everything. It wasn't hard to find out where he worked, and it wasn't hard to figure out who to contact. I made a few calls the next day, posing as someone interested in buying a property. I dropped his name, asked a few questions, and within minutes I had everything I needed. He was still new to the company, hadn't made a lot of sales yet, and was still building his reputation. It was almost too easy. The next morning, I sat down at my computer again, this time with a much clearer head. I had a plan. It wasn't just about punching him in the face anymore. It was about ruining him. The way he had helped ruin my life. I wanted to hit him where it hurt most, his livelihood. And I knew exactly how to do it. I started with his work. I knew how fragile real estate careers could be, especially for someone just starting out. A bad reputation could destroy a career in a heartbeat. I drafted an email, making sure to keep it as professional as possible. I wasn't going to come off like some crazed husband. No, I needed to play this smart. The email was simple. I posed as a concerned potential client, saying I had met him while looking at properties and had overheard him discussing inappropriate things about his personal life while on the job. I made it sound like he was bragging about sleeping with a married woman, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate people. I made it clear that I didn't think someone like him should be representing a reputable company. I sent the email directly to his boss, the owner of the real estate firm. And then I waited. The response came 2 days later. A polite, professional email thanking me for my concern and assuring me they would look into the matter. But I didn't stop there. I had to make sure the fire spread. I posted a review of the company online, making sure to mention his name and how uncomfortable I felt dealing with him. I didn't use my real name, of course. I created a fake profile for this, something completely untraceable. I knew how this game worked. One bad review might not do much damage, but several? That would stick. I reached out to a few friends, asking them to help out. They didn't need to know the details, I just told them I was dealing with a problem and needed their help leaving bad reviews. Most of them didn't ask questions, just did it. Within a week, the company's page was filled with complaints about him. Stories of him being unprofessional, rude, untrustworthy. It was all bullshit, of course, but that didn't matter. Perception is everything in real estate. It wasn't long before I heard from a mutual acquaintance, a guy I knew through some work connections, that he had been fired. They didn't even let him finish out the week. Too many complaints, too much bad press. They couldn't risk keeping him around. I should have felt satisfied. I had taken away his job, hit him where it hurt, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The next step was personal. I started digging into his private life. I had already gone through his social media, but now I was looking for something more. And it didn't take long to find it. A girlfriend. Not a serious one, from what I could tell, but someone he had been seeing for a few months. She didn't seem to know about Rachel, didn't seem to have a clue what kind of man she was dealing with. So I decided to inform her. I found her social media account easily. Another public profile. These people never learned. I sent her a message, keeping it short and to the point. I told her who I was, explained what had been going on, and attached a few of the texts I had pulled from Rachel's phone as evidence. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I laid it all out for her. She responded within an hour. At first, she didn't believe me. She said I had to be lying, that he wasn't that kind of guy. But when I sent her more proof, the screenshots, the times, the details she couldn't deny, her tone changed. She thanked me, said she would confront him, and blocked me. I never heard from her again. But a few days later, I found out they had broken up. I knew because he had posted some pathetic status about losing someone special and needing time to reflect. I almost laughed when I read it. He was trying to play the victim, like he hadn't been caught cheating with a married woman. I thought that would be the end of it. I had taken away his job, ruined his relationship, and made sure his name was tarnished in the industry. But then something happened that I didn't expect. One afternoon, about a week after I had sent the email to his boss, I got a call. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked up anyway, curious. Daniel? The voice on the other end was shaky, nervous. Who's this? I asked, already knowing. It's me. Jason. Jason. The guy who had been sleeping with my wife. I didn't say anything for a moment, just let the silence hang between us. I wanted to see what he had to say. Look, man, I know you're pissed, he continued, his voice cracking. I get it, okay? I screwed up. But you need to stop. This has gone too far. I still didn't respond. I wasn't interested in hearing him grovel. They fired me, all right, he went on, sounding more desperate now. I lost my job. And my girlfriend left me. You've made your point. But you can't keep coming after me like this. It's not right. Now I laughed. I couldn't help it. Not right? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You think what you did was right? No, man, I know it wasn't. But nothing, I cut him off, my voice cold. You brought this on yourself. You didn't care about what was right when you were screwing my wife, did you? So why the hell should I care about what happens to you? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, could practically hear him trying to come up with something, anything, to say that would make me stop. I'm sorry, he finally muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Yeah, I said, you will be. And I hung up. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the phone, feeling the adrenaline rush through me. I had him. He was broken. Jobless. Single. And now he was scared. Good. He deserved every bit of it. But the satisfaction didn't last as long as I thought it would. I had ruined his life, but it hadn't fixed mine. The damage was already done. Rachel had shattered everything we had built, and no amount of revenge was going to change that. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to figure out what came next. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I couldn't stay in this limbo forever, torturing this guy, avoiding my wife, pretending like everything wasn't falling apart. The next step was clear, and I had known it all along. I had to face Rachel again. And this time, we were going to have a real conversation about what the future looked like. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this slide. After hanging up on Jason, I sat in silence for what felt like hours, letting the weight of everything settle on me. I had dismantled the guy's life piece by piece. He was jobless, single, and terrified of what might come next. It was more than he ever would have expected when he started screwing my wife, but even with all that done, nothing inside me felt resolved. It was like putting out a fire that had already burned the house down. The damage wasn't just with him, the damage was with Rachel. That part still felt unfinished. I hadn't fully confronted her, not the way I needed to. I'd shouted at her, threw accusations, and stormed off. But I hadn't actually made her answer for what she'd done. She needed to understand that this wasn't just about her loneliness or her mistake. She had blown up our family and wrecked everything. She needed to say it. She needed to own it. And I wasn't going to give her any more time to hide from that. I found her downstairs later that night. She was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, though it didn't look like she was really watching it. There was an empty wine glass on the table, and the bottle was half drunk beside it. It was clear she had been trying to numb herself since our last confrontation. The house was quiet except for the low hum of whatever was playing on the screen, and the air felt thick with everything that hadn't been said. "Rachel," I said, standing in the doorway. She looked up at me, her face pale and drawn, like she hadn't slept in days. She set the glass down and folded her hands in her lap, waiting. I walked over and stood in front of her, arms crossed. "We need to talk." She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the floor. But after a long pause, she nodded slowly. "I know," she whispered. I sat down across from her, keeping my distance. "I need to hear it from you," I said, my voice steady. "All of it. No more excuses. No more blaming me. Just the truth." Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. For the first time since I found out, she looked defeated, like she had finally realized there was no way out of this. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll tell you everything." She sat there for a few moments, gathering herself. I could see her eyes glistening, but she wasn't crying yet. She seemed more ashamed than anything, like she was gearing up for the worst kind of confession. "It started a few months ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I met him at the gym. He was just friendly at first. We'd talk sometimes, nothing serious. I didn't think anything of it. But then, I don't know, things started to shift. We started texting, and it became something more." I stayed quiet, letting her talk. I didn't need to ask any questions. I knew enough already. I just wanted to hear her say it. "I didn't plan for it to happen," she continued, her voice trembling. "I never thought I'd actually do it. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I was so lonely, Daniel. I felt like you didn't even see me anymore. We'd been drifting apart for so long. I thought maybe this would fill that void." She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It was stupid. I know that now. But at the time, it felt like the only thing that made me feel alive again. He made me feel wanted." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. "So what?" I said, my voice harsher than I intended. "You were feeling unwanted, so you decided to blow up our marriage? You couldn't have just talked to me? You couldn't have tried to fix it with me?" She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I tried, Daniel. I did. But you were always so busy, so wrapped up in work and the kids and everything else. Every time I tried to talk to you, you just brushed me off. I felt invisible." "Invisible?" I repeated, my voice rising. I was here every day, Rachel. I'd been working my ass off to keep this family together. And you're telling me you felt invisible? I know, she cried, her voice breaking. I know that now. I see it all so clearly now, and I hate myself for it. But at the time, I didn't know what else to do. I was desperate. And he was there, offering me the attention I wasn't getting from you. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. I paced the room, running a hand through my hair, trying to calm myself down. Do you even realize what you've done? I asked, turning back to her. Do you understand that you didn't just cheat on me, you destroyed our family? Our kids? What the hell do you think this is going to do to them when they find out? She let out a choked sob, burying her face in her hands. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know how to fix it. You can't fix it, I said flatly. This isn't something that gets fixed with an apology or a few therapy sessions. You've torn apart everything we built. And for what? Some guy who doesn't give a damn about you? She looked up at me, her eyes swollen and red. I was wrong, she said, her voice shaking. I see that now. I should have come to you. I should have fought for us. But I didn't. And now I've ruined everything. Her words hung in the air, but they didn't bring any relief. It was like a confession that came too late, a realization after the fact that didn't change the reality. She had ruined everything, and no amount of regret was going to fix it. I stared at her, trying to decide what to say next. Part of me wanted to walk out, slam the door, and never look back. Another part of me wanted to keep pushing, make her feel every ounce of pain she had caused. But the truth was, I was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to fight anymore. I can't keep doing this, I said finally, my voice low. I can't keep pretending like we can fix this. Because we can't. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. No, Daniel, please, she begged. We can fix this. We can work through it. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy, I'll stop talking to him, whatever you want. Just don't leave me. Please. I shook my head. It's too late for that. You've already left me. The moment you decided to sleep with him, you left this marriage. Her face crumpled, and she started sobbing again, but I couldn't bring myself to care. It was all too much. The lies, the betrayal, the endless excuses. I was done.